Hi, this is Marty Hilton. I'm the National Park Service's inaugural historic architect for climate change, and you're listening to U.S. Modernist Radio.
Mama don't allow no architecture around here. Mama don't allow no architecture around here. Oh, I don't care what Mama don't allow, gonna draw mine modern anyhow. Mama don't allow no architecture around here.
Welcome to U.S. Modernist Radio, where we talk and laugh with people who enjoy, own, create, dream about, preserve, love, and hate modernist architecture, the most exciting and controversial buildings in the world. I'm Tom Guild. The American Institute of Architects, or AIA, is the leading architectural association in the United States, and U.S. Modernist Radio was there for their national conference last June in Chicago. Joining us today is the just-retired CEO of the AIA, Robert Ivy. Later, we'll chat with American jazz legend Diane Schuur, a.k.a. Deedles. And now your host, the former CEO of a national restaurant chain, if by chain you mean one location, and by restaurant you mean a metal snack hut, and by national you mean Raleigh, North Carolina, George Smart.
Thank you, Tom. My career as a restaurateur. It sounds very trendy, but as you might have deduced, I'm stretching the story to the outer limits of hype, so here we go. When I was a freshman in high school, the Athletic Boosters Club, that group of parents every school has to prop up the sports program, through everything from making kids sell stuff no one needs to bribing the part-time refs, was in disarray. Evidently, one mom had pissed off another mom, and one of their husbands said a few choice things. Then people took sides, and before long, everyone stopped wanting to participate.
That's an age-old story.
You got to remember, this was way before the internet, so all this controversy took place via telephone and actual conversations in the carpool lane. Parents were so mad at each other, they abandoned the boosters' main revenue source, the sports concession stand. This was a metal hut with no water and no power and no air conditioning, about 8 feet by 8 feet, that Coca-Cola donated to the high school in the early 70s. It had a Coke fountain system and several racks for selling chips, candy, crackers, and whatever else was full of empty calories to the kids and parents who showed up for afternoon soccer games. Seeing this parental discord, I approached the principal,
the peacemaker,
and offered to take over this emerging food empire, and Cheap George's concession stand was born. I had a cheesy sign made out of old Christmas tree lights, and I ran an extension cord to power it over to the classroom building. People constantly disconnected my cord, either as a prank or by accident, until I put a very large and mean sixth grader in charge of security. He got paid in peanut M&Ms, and it was a win-win, and the customers were happy and they bought lots of soda and candy. They had to, really, as it was the only food source around, except for the moms who brought weird oat cookies that tasted like sugary dirt. Although 2 years later, the boosters made peace with each other and forced me out. It was an invaluable experience in running a business. I made a small fortune as a kid, and to this day, I thank those booster moms for acting like the real housewives of Raleigh. U.S. Modernist Radio is underwritten by Diane Bald and the Budman family, restoring significant architecture in Toronto, Los Angeles, Malibu, and Palm Springs, and by modernist realtor Angela Roll. In a story that we are largely making up, modernist realtor Angela Roll worked her way through college, dancing like no one's watching to Mambo No. 5 and brilliantly house-flipping Neutra, sometimes simultaneously. At 22, following a celebrity-filled party at a famous hillside L.A. modernist house, involving diving off the roof into the pool, Absolute Le Monde, and a new use for WD-40. Angela was recruited to the architecture school, where after years of sleep-deprived design studios, she's now a modernist real estate agent with specialized training, advising buyers and sellers on everything from appropriate renovation to saving a completely doomed mid-century house from destruction. That last one is true. Reach her at angelaroll.com. That's ROEHL, or 919-995-0550.
Architect Robert Ivy graduated from the University of the South and Tulane University. He became editor-in-chief of Architectural Record and kept that job for 15 years. In 2011, Ivy was named the CEO of the American Institute of Architects, a position he held through last spring, overseeing a period of growth and repositioning the largest architectural association in America for 21st century challenges. Like, the survival of the planet.
Yeah.
For the first time in 11 years, he attended the AIA National Conference in June and didn't have any responsibilities, which, if you've ever worked for a national conference, that's a sweet spot. Here's George's conversation with the very relaxed Robert Ivy.
Bob, I can't help but notice that you seem to be the happiest man at the Chicago conference here, because after all these years of attending the conference and organizing the conference, you have no responsibilities this year.
There's a tremendous smile on my face, George, and it's very real. I can't tell you what a sense of relief and joy it is to be in a place with many of my hundreds, thousands of my great friends in this gorgeous setting and get to see them in person for the first time in 3 years and not be responsible for the outcome of the sessions, of the attendance, of the revenue, of the things people say.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
It's a great relief, but it's a lot of fun.
You don't have to be shuttled from place to place on a minute-by-minute calendar,
No,
right?
Yeah, we used to literally have, an hourly schedule, and you were shuttled from place to place. In some places, you literally just made an appearance and stopped in and spoke to a few people and maybe said a few words. It never was enough. Never was enough.
Yeah.
But, there were some real high points to that, too. I've got to tell you. Someone was asking, what's one of the great things that you ever did? And this is parenthetical, but in a way it's not. I got to speak in the proscenium of Radio City Music Hall.
Really?
For God's sake, yes.
Oh, nice.
Yes, that was...
Did you do any leg kicks like the Rockettes,
No,
Bob?
I
would have liked to. I would have paid to see Bob Ivy.
I'm too old. I'm too old. I can't kick that high. But Carl Elefante literally, and I had a day where Carl and I had the stage to ourselves, no one in the audience except the lady helping us get ready for the next day. Go into the backstage, see where the performers dress, and then go out there alone and practice our remarks that we were going to make the next day to several thousand people. Good gosh, what a kick. When I'd sat in that theater at age, 11, and watched, I don't know what movie, but some big movie with Cary Grant and Eva Marie Saint. I mean, that was like once-in-a-lifetime rush.
Now, practice. Did you ever make it to Carnegie Hall?
Never made it to Carnegie Hall. But I did make it here to the auditorium around the corner here in Chicago.
Okay.
And we had a wonderful event, and this was back with Architectural Record, where we aired the film by Lou Kahn's son.
My Architect,
with his son present and in front of, again, a couple of thousand people. And then had conversation with him up on the stage. And that is almost equally impressive space for one or two people to stand in front of a large congregation, if you will, of true believers who are sitting there stomping their feet on the floor as they're watching something wonderful.
Yes, the My Architect film is really amazing. I hear that he's going to be doing an update on that in this next year or two. Kind of the director's cut kind of thing.
Wow.
He's been a guest on the show.
Yes.
And has told me about that. So that might be coming soon.
Yeah, well, I look forward to seeing that. And one of the most engaging and warm individuals, and I thought his film was actually superb. We were with him for several screenings of that film over time. Look forward to seeing what he does with it.
Now, give our listeners a little idea of the scale of an AIA conference. Because it's not just getting people together, at the country club for some brunch. It's a big operation.
Indeed it is. And so think about New York, for instance. We had 26,000 people present. Didn't know if that many people would show up. We knew there would be a large, large crowd. And the planning begins years in advance. That's one thing that for someone like myself who was not in the association world but had been around event planning for years through McGraw-Hill and Architectural Record, we did them all the time. This was at a whole nother level of demand and execution and actually result. 26,000 people. So the planning begins typically with what city the event is going to take place in.
And that's how many years ahead of something?
It can be 10 years ahead,
Really?
maybe 11, yes, because these deals have to be pre-negotiated with the cities, and the premium cities are in high demand, and there are only a few in the United States that can accommodate
that
size group. And it isn't just the attendee size. It's also the size of the trade show, because the AIA trade show is one of the largest trade shows in the United States, bar none. I mean, it is in the top tier of trade shows in the country. It's huge. So you have to have a convention hall big enough to show all of the windows and doors and concrete and machinery that goes with making architecture. At the same time, you have to have a convening space large enough for several thousand people. In the case of some of the major facilities, 7,000 people would be present for a single presentation and would want to be.
Right.
At the same time, you have to have breakout spaces for all these people to go and do continuing education or have conversations or socialize and network with each other, have cocktail parties, and have fun. So it all goes together, and all that planning begins 10 or 11 years out with the choice of the city. Then I think the next steps involve often the key performers or spokespeople.
Yeah. And you've had presidents.
Keynote, yes, we've had presidents of the United States. Very, very hard to do, I might add. And, you know, some of these keynote speakers at that level, well, and I don't mean just political personalities, but others, get extremely demanding. They have, you know, almost like in a sitcom. You know, we need this sort of food present. We have
they need the green M&Ms kind of thing.
You have to feed. You know, some are vegan, some are allergic to this or that. They have to have some person present with them, and this is not specious. They really do demand this. You don't give it to all of them, and sometimes you can negotiate these things out. But some demand to be flown privately, which we would be very loath to do.
Yeah.
But we've had to do that on occasion just to get them there. And they cost a lot of money.
They do.
Yeah,
Speakers are what, like 50, 100, 150,000 in that range? Really higher than that.
Yeah, I'm not going to say what it is, but it was always within the budget. In other words, you don't ever
plan a conference without having.
It's related to the scale of the conference and what you think, what sort of value you think you can receive for the person that's going to be there.
Yeah.
So you don't invite an extremely expensive speaker, obviously, to a smaller conference. And they're not all gargantuan. It varies by place. Architects like to go to certain cities, for instance. And we also, as architects, love the experience of the urban experience in any of these great cities. So San Francisco and New York and Chicago and Washington, D.C. and Los Angeles, and those are among the, I would say, the prime premier sort of venues for
Orlando,
architects.
I would guess, too, right?
Well, so there's a second tier here that really has to do with, they have the capacity, but for the architectural community, they don't necessarily have the draw.
The buildings,
the
history.
I mean, where do you go? You know, Orlando has things to see.
Yeah.
And they've done a great deal. But let them loose in San Francisco, and it's catnip, and the architects are in playland. They're in urban heaven. They're frolicking, gambling, going through the streets, taking pictures, seeing their friends, taking people to different neighborhoods. And actually, Orlando provided one of our more successful conventions. It really did a great job, and had done a lot of, let's say, development work since we had been there in the past. Las Vegas is a little bit different story. They've got the capacity for anything. Well, my gosh, they do bigger shows than the AIA show, the concrete show, for instance.
Consumer electronics shows, yes.
These are huge shows. But once you get past the fantasy strip and some few arterials on the side, you've seen the architecture and you've seen the fantasy architecture. So really much there has to do with the content of the show itself.
Okay.
Has to be.
Yeah. So that's how you gauge it against the kind of talent you get and the kind of experiences you have people lined up to have happen.
And, people are always anxious for us to come to, let's say, a mid-sized city in the Midwest, for instance. And some are extremely worthy of our presence and our interest and would really attract a crowd. They don't have the capacity. They just can't handle the crowds. You have to have X number of hotel rooms. All those hotel rooms are booked at the same time the convention city's booked.
Right.
You have to have extreme capacity for trade show, hotel rooms, entertainment venues.
All the expo people that fly into town.
All the expo people, all of that. So I would say that's a frustrating component of this. There are wonderful places that we'd love, I think, to have had the conference when I was there that they just simply couldn't handle it. That's all.
So let me take you back to February 2020. And you're sailing along. You're getting ready to have that big conference that summer. And then March comes. And what happens?
Yes. I was on an airplane coming back from Los Angeles, and the world was shutting down. And COVID was actually out in California at that particular moment, and we were all being sort of careful, but in a sort of jocular way. We were bumping
elbows,
bumping elbows and fists and that sort of thing, and no masks at all. And I think we were at a conference, it was a net zero conference, and there were about 400 people there. It was an excellent conference. And we're flying back, and it was as if that were a transition moment. Landed, and the world went into lockdown the next week. We closed the association. Many organizations closed. The country began to close down as the scale and scope of this crisis really began to emerge very, very rapidly. And in fact, I had been in the very county that was one of the hot spots at that moment, up near Napa. We'd taken a day and gone up there just to see things.
So logistically, I was always curious how this worked. I mean, these cities and hotels and convention centers you've dealt with for 8 or 10 years in planning, do they just bump ahead a year? Do they take a slot 10 years out? I mean, how does it reshuffle?
Well, there are a couple of things. One is legally, because you're on the hook.
You got it.
In many cases, you have a contract that you cannot breach. On the other hand, with good negotiation and, let's say, a savvy legal team and financial team, there are contingencies built into your contracting. And that was, in fact, our case. We had legal ability to not attend if there were, and I don't remember the legal language, but whether it's a health crisis of extreme scale or scope, something on that order. And in fact, we had those clauses in our contract.
Were alien invasions covered, Bob? Because that hasn't happened yet, and I'm wondering.
You don't know, they might be out there. This was an alien invasion of a different kind, microbes, unfortunately. And so essentially, my wife is in the travel business. Revenues dropped by 90 to 95% in the travel business. Delta Airlines, look at their receipts during that period of time. But it was also true for hotels, and they obviously had to struggle. And many of them really fought and clawed to try to insist that their contracts be honored, and in fact, many of them were. We were fortunate. We had the legal protection going into this crisis, and so we emerged relatively unharmed.
That's good.
Yeah.
And does that just bump ahead a year, or they just go back into the rotation for the next time around?
That voids that contract, and then you're into the next step. But then, of course, we had another year of pandemic, and now we're into the brave new world. And we have had this convention planned for a long time. And the people that are enjoying that right now, are going to hear the President of the United States, the former President of the United States this afternoon. And in fact, he's someone we had talked to over a period of time. Ultimately had his wife, Michelle Obama.
Now, is it true that President Obama was interested in architecture as a career? I sort of heard conflicting stories about that, whether he was serious about it as a student or whether it was just kind of a hobby for him.
I would say it's only third hand that I can verify that, but I have heard that very thing. And in fact, he told members of our team when they were talking to his group earlier that it was something that he had always wanted to do. And in fact, he was involved in community organizing and a variety of other things here in Chicago. And Chicago, the city itself, is an architecture city. This is a city based on, built on, devised with planning and design principles. And for the time that he was here, I'm sure that seeped into his consciousness. I can't speculate any more than that.
The Obama Presidential Center is going to be here.
Yes.
As part of the Grant Park, Millennial Park.
Todd Williams and Billy Chin are actively engaged with him and them now. And we are anxiously awaiting, the next steps.
The word on that?
I don't know the year. I don't know when we'll actually see
And I think, isn't George Lucas building something here, too?
I think that was deferred. I'm not an expert on the current.
Okay.
There were plans put afloat, and I don't think they met with a happy conclusion.
Yeah.
But I can talk about the planning in Chicago that I have observed over this period of time, because we're looking at a city that has really reveled in and exploited and used architecture and design and urban planning to its benefit. We were just talking about the Chicago Architecture Foundation, which gives one of the world's great boat tours.
Fabulous tour.
Of the architecture of this city and where it resides and what it consists of and how it grew. And the fact that Chicago, back in the late 19th century, had a bit of a chip on its shoulder compared to New York. But then it took architecture and planning, and through these great architects, built this magnificent array and plan along this lakefront that I'm looking out over your shoulder at now. The result has been incomparable, and people come from all over the world. Not only tourists, but people have chosen to live here. The fields have emptied out of Illinois, and people have moved to the city. And in fact, it's been a real, a magnet for people to retire to, and for younger people to be trained and educated in with the great universities that are present here, in addition to all the industrial and corporate work that's already taking place here. In particular, I enjoyed, as I always do on this conference with a big smile on my face, running down the lake. And did that yesterday afternoon and went by Millennium Park, which is a great example of the best of contemporary design.
Chicago's backyard.
It's Chicago's backyard, front yard, if you will. And here to my right is the magnificent addition to the Art Institute, and to my left, down a promenade, is the Frank Gehry Pavilion that the Pritzkers had donated, and magnificent landscape architecture that ultimately, has tremendous civic boon. This is a place where you can literally see the fruits of investment and design and human will exercised on the physical landscape. This place is far different from other cities, and it's because people have embraced this ability. They have made a conscious intention. That's what architecture is in a way. It's the exercise of human will on physical objects. It's planned virtually, but it is exercised physically. Right. And we get to enjoy it. I got to run for an hour totally free, wearing nothing but a pair of tennis shoes, shorts, and a T-shirt.
Pictures are available on Instagram, folks.
Okay. Paid no one anything. And mixing and mingling, that's one of the great boons that this city has. And it was by design. It didn't happen by chance.
Well, let me ask you about the AIA.
Yes.
You were there how many years?
11.
11 years, and before that with Architecture Record?
15.
So you have been, really at least 26 years more in a very close relationship with the AIA. What I notice as an outsider who's not an architect is that, in a way, as head of the AIA, you're kind of like a little president of the United States. And people have...
I'm sorry, I have to laugh at that.
Yeah, but similarly...
Yes.
People have big expectations.
Of course they do.
Of what you, Bob, as chief executive, do. I mean, tell me what it's like to deal with those expectations all the time.
I'm sorry, I have to laugh at that. Totally frankly, when I came into this role, or the one I've just vacated, I thought, extremely well prepared, because my life at Architecture Record in McGraw-Hill in New York included both architecture, engineering, design, with a broad view of that work all over the world. And I had this wonderful exposure to the business of architecture and to all the people that support it, all the building product manufacturers, all the engineering support that comes into play. So I went into it with my eyes wide open. What I was unprepared for is that you don't just wave your hands in this role at AIA and have things to happen. It's essentially a...
Really? You don't just invade Canada on your first week?
No, you can't do it. It won't work. It's not a dictatorship, and it isn't a presidency.
Yeah.
There's a real distinction here. It's essentially, the organization is essentially a consensus-based group of people who come together for an express purpose. And the purpose is to share their own experience and their own knowledge and to expand on that together. And they come from, and this is a really difficult thing to assimilate and to understand, but they come from a wide variety that represents the United States and, in fact, around the world, of opinions. By the way, if you haven't heard, people don't necessarily agree on everything in the United States, right? Yeah. It's maybe a secret.
Is that a thing?
It's true. It's a thing. It's a problem, I would say. But this polarity is obviously expressed in the association itself. And so people don't necessarily agree, although architects tend to be, I would say, progressive, obviously. And they are optimistic by nature. I think that's a generalization, but I think I can make it. Because we have to be. We have to know that the work that we begin will end in 2 or 3 years, and it takes that long to do it, with an outcome. So our gratification is based in the future. We're future forward. We think of what will happen. And we therefore tend to be somewhat optimistic. But we are divided, and we're not necessarily together. So politics really should not play a part in the association, politics per se. That is, choosing, partisanship, let me put it that way. It's been very, very difficult line to walk with the association, with people feeling so passionately one way or another.
So as an example of that...
Oh, how about that? Yes, go right ahead.
When Donald Trump was elected...
Yes, I've heard about that.
You wrote a very civil letter saying that the AIA was going to work with the new administration because they were elected, due process, orderly transition, all of that kind of thing. Almost like a very boring press release.
Yeah, it was.
And the reaction was not what you typically expect.
No, it really wasn't. And in fact, I mean, in all candor, it's a letter I didn't write. It was a standard form letter that we write
for every presidency.
For every presidency. And in this case, we actually, I know this was taken out in advance. There was no word of congratulations in it. It was meant to be a lobbying letter to convince a new administration that we would work with him for housing. We wanted public housing. We wanted architects involved. The timing was atrocious. And in fact, I tried to kill the letter that day when I got to work at about 9 in the morning, and people were openly weeping in the corridors of the association. And they said, I'm sorry, that letter shipped at 6 this morning. Well, the rest is history, because obviously the letter should not have gone out. I mean, and we apologize for it. I apologize for it profusely, and owned it. I mean, the association sent it, it bore my signature, and it went out. However, having said that, that was not a partisan choice. In fact, if anything, it was a lobbying letter for the whole association, for all architects, to do housing.
Yeah, you can read the letter online. There are lots of copies of it places.
Yes.
And it really is like, you could put it for any president, really.
It's true. It won't go away, as you say. It's very much digital at this point. Well, actually, I think a rather irresponsible headline ensued in some form of media that said Ivy supports. I did not. In fact, I supported the other party, but I didn't talk about that when I was in office. I didn't talk about what I supported or didn't. But what it did do was a positive thing. And I think this was an important lesson. And this is something that people are taught when they're taught character by their parents. And that is, you own up to what happened if you were in a position of responsibility. We did that. But beyond that, what are you going to do with it? And in our case, we went back and stated our values. We said, what do we as architects care about? So our board of directors and I and members of the association forged a statement of values that we very quickly put out. And it is what we believed in, what we do believe in. And we elucidated those over the coming months and years and issued a series of statements on our beliefs. I think it, if anything, strengthened our resolve, and I think helped us build character in a very painful way by really standing firm on our values and making them clear. And I think it changed the association for the better, as painful as that might be.
Well, and it was something that didn't last forever either. I mean, the news cycle blew on past after a while, and you didn't have to deal with it anymore.
People do ask about it from time to time.
When you do the research, it pops up, right?
Right, sure.
Now, during his tenure in office, President Trump, largely led by Justin Schubo and the National Civic Art Society, formulated this executive policy that was going to basically eliminate modernist design in all the new federal buildings, saying that this was an attack on America, you know, the whole piling on of stuff. What I want to ask you about is, now that that's been reversed and we're back to the way it was, is to explain to our listeners the way it was. What is the Moynihan documents, and how are they important to the construction of government buildings?
Sure. Well, let me back up to the preceding event. Let me make it clear that I live in an 1838 house myself. And architects are trained in architectural history, and I think many, if not most of us, revere the architecture of the past. In fact, many of us practice and learn the principles of neoclassical design, and some of us are doing beautiful jobs of it. What was wrong with the statement, in my view, and I stood on a bully pulpit and screamed until my face turned red, was that you cannot dictate design. The only people who have dictated design, in my knowledge, in so broader scale, were Albert Speer and others, let's just say, with regimes that we're not particularly happy with. And in this case,
the Kardashians, I think.
No, that's a different regime. No, you don't dictate design. And in fact, we're a multi-partite society, and obviously we have different perspectives and different points of view. And yes, the Federal Mall is, what should I say, lovely, and yet there's actually variety in the projects that are on the Federal Mall.
That's right.
Would you dare to sit here and tell me that you don't think that Sir David Adjaye's African American Museum should not be there because it doesn't conform to some principle or other? That's one of the most popular buildings built in the United States in the last century. I think what you like about it aesthetically, it has attracted people and brought people to the center of American democracy and given them a home. So design can do that, architecture can do that, but if it's stultified or simplified or codified, it won't.
And the Moynihan principles really made that clear.
That is correct. Daniel Patrick Moynihan, who was a great advocate and, of course, a great senator, a great advocate for architecture, design, and planning, helped us to achieve Pennsylvania Avenue as the nation's main street, if you will, and employed great architect John Carl Warnke and others to help bring that street into prominence that had tremendous variety already inherent in it, but really made it into one of the great places that it is. Moynihan basically wrote a simple set of what has been called his principles that really talk about the ability to not have political parties or others dictate what the federal design philosophy should be, but to reach out to the people who spend their lives doing this, to wit, America's architects and planners, and to turn to them to help us achieve something of design excellence. And the result of that has been a program through the General Services Administration that is built on those principles, a design excellence program that has built projects all over this country, a program I'm still completely supportive of as an individual, as an architect, as a professional. And it has resulted in some magnificent results for the country. So Moynihan is really, I think, the bedrock that we look toward, and I hate to see it disregarded.
And specifically, it really advocated a diversity of styles.
Yep.
And I've looked at the documents themselves, and they're not too murky, they're not too jargony. You can go online and see the GSA Design Excellence documents, which is really kind of interesting to see where that all went. I'm personally glad that it is returned to that state where people can choose whatever is going to be appropriate for a site or for a particular function or something else like that.
So here's an example. I recently served on a GSA, and I have been for many, many years now, a GSA Design Review peer. And I'm so supportive of the program. But my last job, I really wasn't able to do too much of it. I was so busy. But I got to do one just here in the last couple of years. And it was for a courthouse in Greenville, Mississippi. I had lived in that city. So as a juror and someone reviewing these plans, together with a group of GSA professionals themselves, looked at that city and seen what had happened to it. And it's a city in need of a new vision at this point. Its economy has changed.
What kind of town was it? Was it a mill town?
No. Greenville, Mississippi was a town of about 50,000 people.
Okay.
Extremely prosperous in several industries. The port on the Mississippi River.
Okay.
And farming. However, it was a divided economy between black and white, and it was not, I would say, equitable in that sense, but it generated a great deal of income, interest, even literature. So great writers like Shelby Foote were born there, and many, many others. Harding Carter, the great American editor.
Sure.
And his son, Harding, who is still alive and became the spokesperson for the Carter administration. At any rate, great writers, great literature, a great heritage. The city had changed dramatically. It had gone into an economic struggle. And the majority of, as I understand it, of their revenues now are transfer payments. They literally are welfare payments. So many people who are challenged have moved into the city from the farms.
Okay.
And so the population base is primarily struggling, and this federal courthouse, unfortunately, has many members of society who are brought in to this federal place. And what should they be? What should they be? Reminded of a neoclassical past, which in the American South often referred to the plantation system.
Right.
Is that the way that we wish to represent a democracy to
and
this?
Justice.
And justice to these people. Instead, the architects had a notion of talking to the people in the community and creating a building that would make justice transparent. So they are making a courthouse that is like a lantern, a building that you can see into, not see the courtroom itself, but see the actual passageways. And when a family will go inside, you can see them up
like
on
many
another
museums
level.
have done.
That's exactly
yes.
right. And it's separated, and it is safe. And courthouses are complex plans because of the numerous pathways and cross security and all those things that have to happen. But this building is going to succeed. And that is a direct product of the General Services Administration's Design Excellence Program and the principles of Daniel Patrick Moynihan.
The other day at one of the general sessions,
Yes.
I was noticing how much of the future of AIA is female. You have a new African-American CEO.
Yep.
You have a soon-to-be new African-American president of the association. And they're up there, and there's a great sense in the room of hopefulness and optimism at the representation that's going to be able to take place and the kind of equity issues that are going to happen. And yet, around me, there are like a dozen people, and they're anywhere between 28 and maybe 45 or something like that. And they are all abuzz because the new CEO at the front has a plastic water bottle beside her table, and they just can't get over it. It's like, what is AIA doing with this plastic water bottle?
Right.
Which sort of gets to one of my earlier questions is, I mean, obviously AIA is not trying to ruin the planet.
Yes.
But how do you deal with this as an executive in an organization where you have all these opinions coming at you, and they're very sincere and they're very well-intentioned all the time?
Yes, that's one of those oh my God moments. I mean, George, you've talked about a world in a microcosm. And on the large scale, this female and racially diverse representation that you see among this leadership is long overdue. So a profession that had only roughly, let's say, 500 registered African-American female architects. That was the case a year and a half ago. That's it.
That's total ever, right?
For the country. And that is not enough. Clearly, that is ridiculous, reprehensible, and wrong. So that had to change. And the notion that we've got a new president who is female and African American and has been a president of the National Organization of Minority Architects, that is cool. It's overdue. We're so happy for it. And I say we. I think collectively we are. That our CEO is an African American female is overdue. We've had female leaders. And this is a convergence. Let's just say, frankly, that many of the values that we've been talking about, and it's easy to talk, but those values have come into play. And how great is that? Two of the pillars of the strategic plan of the association, among them, one is equity, diversity, and inclusion. The second is sustainability, or carbon neutrality, or whatever you might say. So a plastic water bottle is, let's say, may not, who knows how that happened? I have no idea.
Right. And it's not like it's right or wrong, but you're just the juxtaposition of this wonderful sea change of leadership, and all this dozen people can do is focus on the bottle.
Yes, I know. Well, it's a fussy group, George. It's a fussy group. Architects are hypercritical. Why? Because they're trained to be critics. You have to stand up, the equivalent of naked, in front of a room, in front of a group of strangers, and defend something that you created out of your own intellectual knowledge. And you have to present this baby, this child, to others, and others don't necessarily want to like it. So they're giving and throwing.
This is called studio, folks, if you've been in architecture school.
Yes, right. And teachers and other students can ask you hard and penetrating questions that may, in fact, challenge the very basis of your own decision-making. And it's hard, hard, hard to do. You carry those lessons forward because you must. In some cases, it has been an oppressive system. And in fact, people get a sort of PTSD, if you will, from some of their experience where teachers have stomped on their models or yelled at them. That's wrong. And all that has been pointed out as wrong. And yet we carry culturally a lot of that baggage forward, and we become hypercritical ourselves. And I would say that it is, my experience, is typical. You'd walk through the hall and one person shakes your hand and, gosh, it's so good to see you. And the next person says, gosh, it's so good to see you, but why don't you think about changing this or that? And there's a lot of human nature in evidence in that work. But I think for architects that we are a hypercritical group.
Well, Bob, I want to thank you for all your years of service
Thank you.
here to the organization. And on behalf of U.S. Modernist, you've been very instrumental in the last few years in helping us get magazines for our library and connecting with that. We're very proud to host, I guess, maybe 80% now of all the AIA magazine output that ever existed.
Let's get to 100%.
Yeah. So thank you for talking with me.
It was a delight, George. Absolute delight. Thanks.
That was my conversation with past AIA CEO Robert Ivy.
Diane Schuur, a.k.a. Deedles, began singing and playing the piano as a child. She debuted at age 10 in the Carnegie Hall of Tacoma, Washington, the Holiday Inn Lounge. As an adult, she went a little farther. Deedles was on The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson 11 times. She sang at the White House 3 times. Over the course of 6 decades, she's worked with B.B. King, Maynard Ferguson, Stan Getz, Ray Charles, Stevie Wonder, Herbie Hancock, Alison Krauss, Vince Gill, Mark Knopfler, and Jose Feliciano. And our favorite note in 1996, she was on Sesame Street. She was interviewed by Elmo about how a blind person can learn to use other senses to adapt in the world. In 2000, she was awarded the Helen Keller Achievement Award by the American Foundation for the Blind. 2 Grammy wins and 3 more nominations later, Deedles is still touring and recording. With over 25 albums, her latest record is Running on Faith. So coming to us live and on tape from her home in Palm Springs, hello, Deedles.
Hey, how's it going?
It's going good.
Good.
Before we start talking about music, how was it to be on Sesame Street?
Oh, it was a kick. Kevin Clash is the guy's name who portrays Elmo, and their voices are so different. But yes, it was a lot of fun. Oh, and by the way, I need to let you know that Barry Manilow is on that list as well. He produced an album for me.
Okay. Yeah. Barry Manilow came to Raleigh in the 70s when he was the keyboardist for Bette Midler.
Oh, okay.
Way back.
Yeah, we're in Raleigh, North Carolina.
Oh, all right.
Yep.
I remember flying into Raleigh once or twice in my career.
Yeah, we had a
So-
few gates in the early days, and we're a little bigger now. We actually fly to other countries.
Yep.
Okay.
So tell us about your meeting with pianist George Shearing, one of the greats in jazz.
Wow, you have done your homework. I'm impressed. George and I met. I was like 11 and a half years old. When my mom was still alive, she took me to the Edgewater Inn where he was staying and performing, and that's in Seattle, Washington. And he had his guide dog, Lee, under the piano bench. We just had a wonderful time. I went ahead and did some of his musical selections from an album called Concerto for My Love that you can't get anymore. And we just had a wonderful time.
And he was one of your mentors, really, along with Stan Getz.
Correct.
How was Stan to work with? You know, in going back through the songbook of the 50s and 60s and 70s, Stan was just everywhere.
Oh, I know, with the gal that did Girl from Ipanema and Gilberto, was that her name?
Astrid Gilberto, yes.
Yeah. Well, at least I got the last name right.
We found out in one of our earlier shows, Deedles, that the girl upon which that song is based is still around, still alive.
Oh, for heaven's sake.
Yeah, she's kind of a minor celebrity down there in Brazil.
Well, that's cool. Yeah, it was a trip working and collaborating with Stan Getz. He's a personality all into himself, and I'll just leave it at that.
This song she recorded is a meditation on the cycle of life and the inevitability of, well, death. Made famous in 1960 by rhythm and blues singer Dinah Washington, one of Deedles' favorites. It was written and produced by Clyde Otis. In 1964, Aretha Franklin released a version on her album Unforgettable, a tribute to Dinah Washington. And Gladys Knight recorded this song for her 2006 album, Before Me. Find your Kleenex or some vodka. Here's Deedles with The Bitter Earth.
This bitter earth well, what fruit it bears what good is love? When no one shares and if my life is like the dust that hides the glow of a rose, what good am I? Heaven only knows. Lord, this bitter earth yes, can be so cold. Today, you're young. But too soon, you're old. But while a voice within me cries, I'm sure someone may answer my call. And this bitter, bitter earth, ooh, may not, oh, be so bitter. bitter.
That song is like an exquisite cup of coffee. You just want to get every drop, Deedles.
Oh, thank you. It was an emotional thing to do, you know, with the different things that I've gone through in my own life and the journey that I've been taking. So I think it was a really appropriate thing to include on this record.
Now, you live in Palm Springs, one of our favorite places, as our listeners know. And in Palm Springs is a wonderful little spot called the Purple Room, where you play occasionally.
Yes, actually, I'll be playing there on the 9th and 10th of December, and the 10th will be my 69th birthday.
Oh, boy.
Oh, sweet.
Yeah.
You know, my birthday's 2 days later, Deedles, on the 12th.
All right, along with Dionne Warwick and Frank Sinatra.
You are very good with birthdays. No one has ever been that precise before.
We'll be expecting a card for George.
Yeah, I'm going to have to fly out there for that.
And we'll send you a card.
Oh, how cool is that? Well, if you're sending me a card, I'll have to give you my address because it's not exactly in Palm Springs. It's in Cathedral City.
That's close enough, Deedles, I think.
Yeah, that's close enough to jazz.
On social media, your Facebook page is devoted to inspiring fans. One particular quote struck me. There is beauty in silence, which is usually what my wife says to me when I'm annoying. What does that mean to you?
Well, I live alone, so I don't have to deal with it. So how's that?
Okay.
I can have the silence whenever I want. I mean, the only thing that might disturb it is either watching air disasters or forensic files or Puss Puss the cat. So, you know, life for me is good. I mean, I'm not saying I have anything against marriage or anything, but I really kind of dig my solitude at this juncture in my life. So we'll see what happens in the rest of it.
This next song was written in 1956. By the great Alan and Marilyn Bergman and Lou Spence, and it became a big hit for Frank Sinatra. It's been covered by Shirley Horn, Lou Rawls, Steve Terrell, John Pizzarelli, Michael Bublé. Here's Deedles with Nice and Easy.
Let's take it nice and easy. It's gonna be so easy for us to fall in love. Hey baby, what's your hurry? Relax and don't you worry. We're gonna fall in love. To romance, that's safe to say, but let's make all the stops along the way. The problem now, of course, is to simply hold your horses. To rush would be a crime, 'cause nice and easy does it every time. so easy for us to fall in love. Hey baby, what's your hurry? Relax and don't you worry. We're gonna fall in love. We're on the road to romance, that's safe to say. But let's make all the stops along the way. The problem now, of course, is to simply hold your horses. To rush would be a crime, 'cause nice and easy does it. Nice and easy does it. Nice and easy does it every time. Ooh,
Sweet. That is sweet, Deedles.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you. You know, that was done on my 60th birthday, which, well, it'll be 9 years ago this year, so time goes by so fast.
It does go by so fast.
It really does.
The website is dianeschuur.com, DIANESCHUUR.com. Deedles, thanks so much for joining us.
Oh, sure. Thank you so much. I mean, it was a pleasure for me, and really do appreciate it.
Thanks for listening. U.S. Modernist Radio is underwritten by Diane Bald and the Budman family, restoring significant architecture in Toronto, Los Angeles, Malibu, and Palm Springs, and by modernist realtor Angela Roll. Okay, Tom, roll us out.
Visit USModernist.org's massive archives to listen to past shows, discover documentation of 15,000 significant modernist houses, and access 4 million pages of classic 20th century architecture magazines. U.S. Modernist Radio is produced by Soundtracks Recording Studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. Our theme song was performed by George Smart and Robinson Earl. Kelly Policelli does guest research when she's not taking a deep dive into the archives of Horace Gifford and Dan Duckham. Soon to come on USModernist.org. U.S. Modernist Radio is a production of Modernist Archive Incorporated, a nonprofit educational archive for the documentation, preservation, and promotion of modernist residential design. I'm Tom Guild. George and I will be back next week with another Windy City AIA National Conference special edition of U.S. Modernist Radio.
There are going to be 2 more editions, actually.
That wasn't in the memo. Nobody tells me anything.